I think for myself as a storyteller and as a filmmaker, it would be kind of my interest in the more minority groups in film, particularly in queer people. That ends up basing a lot of my work around that or trying to incorporate it in some way. Um, so I think the creative arts are important in society because they reflect society we're currently in and what could happen. I know currently I've seen a lot of people referring to how the world currently feels a bit like the Hunger Games, with things like the Met Gala and Eurovision being very opulent and almost like the capital, compared to what's happening in countries like Palestine and Ukraine, where they're currently fighting wars for their independence from people invading them. I'd say my love for storytelling came from when I started cosplaying when I was younger and making AUs of different characters and creating my own backstories for them, and then continuing that into work with a group of friends where we made short CMVs with more script based work. I think that's where my love for storytelling started, really. So I want to enter the creative field to be able to make some more diverse type films and TV series. Whilst they are currently on the increase, a lot of them are still very stereotypical. So that is why I do want to join it. As for what I want to do in the creative industry, I would very much like to be a director writer, as well as running my own production company alongside that, so I can have that more control over what I make rather than having to pander to higher ups who are really only focused massively on the money in it. So currently I am setting up a production company myself, and I think what makes it unique from other ones is that it is entirely queer ran. It's run by myself and a friend from back home, and we're both queer individuals in different senses. And from that, I do think it makes it more unique, and we're very open to bringing in people from other minorities to be able to tell their stories. So people of color, people from religions that aren't typically seen in a positive light, people with disabilities who are neurodivergent. I think that's what makes the production company I want to really set off unique. Currently, I've mostly made short films and pilot episodes for TV series. I would want to extend that into feature-length full films and full TV series. My reason for wanting to do TV series more is that you can get more in-depth storytelling in them. There's a lot more time to play with, and you can develop characters more in depth. Whilst with film, whilst it's a shorter form, you can sometimes reach a wider audience because more people are interested in going to the cinema to see new films, new releases, those kinds of things. Okay. I think my recurring theme in my work is that it is so queer based. There's always at least one queer character in it, even if it's not necessarily a queer storyline. So I've made 2 films where they are romance stories from different parts of the LGBT community, and I've also written stories with queer characters in them, but that's not necessarily been the defining features of the stories. The character just so happens to be queer to have more queer individuals just in films and TV show casually, where it's not the defining feature of the entire series. What? Because queer people are just in everyday life. So whilst I do make my queerness a big part of my identity, there are a lot of queer people who don't. It's just a part of who they are. They might be gay, but they just go around their day-to-day life doing everything else as they would regularly. They just so happen to like someone of the same sex. Nice. So genres I particularly like are both the gothic and fantasy. That is because you can more bend our rules of society with those 2 genre types, particularly with fantasy, where you can base it in a completely different world where you don't have to play by this world's social norms at all, and that can be a good way to address different issues that are happening in the world in a way that people might find them slightly more palatable and easier to understand. So one of my main storytelling influences would be Neil Gaiman. His work spans lots of different issues. He focuses a lot on religion, and he also has a lot of focus on queer identities as well. As for stylistically for film and television, I would say Tim Burton, because it's such a unique style. You can spot a Tim Burton film out of a lineup very easily. And I think that's quite important as a filmmaker so that people can identify your work quite quickly. So in the past 3 years from what I've studied, it's most likely been like the study of queer theory and of Gothic architectures that I've most been drawn into and like brought back into my own work themselves. They're the two theories that most align with what I want to create as a filmmaker. I think the biggest concerns in the creative sector are is lack of diversity. That extends to there needing to be more women in the creative field, more people of colour, more people just from like minority backgrounds in general. And I think that could be kind of fixed related by the film industry being held to the same standards that other industries are, where you need to have like so many people from these like different communities a part of your like crew and your team, because then it gives them more experience, since the film industry itself is already very difficult to get into unless you know people who are already in it. So one of the most recent projects that I've been a part of is a high fantasy piece, and I wanted to be a part of that because whilst I have a great love for fantasy, I haven't had the opportunity to make anything fantasy based yet that is so in depth as this one. It's also given me an opportunity to work with more external actors, more of the I've worked with some of the second years on it as well, doing sound, and it's given me more chance to look into costuming, since it's not based in the current times, it's based in more medieval fantasy, that kind of typical fantasy aesthetic that you get. So it's been a good experience for me for like learning, because we've also had a lot that is heavy in post-production, so it's been learning how to set up the camera and the lighting and the location to make sure that in post everything looks the same once the CGI's done over it. So with our themes, it focuses a lot on like a war world. There is a war happening in the storyline, and I think that does reflect like our current world, because whilst in our country ourselves we're happy, there's not much happening to us, in other parts they are fighting, trying to defend themselves, and that does pass over into the film, in which some of the main characters, they've lost family members and stuff to the mages of the world, which are creating something called the Desolation, where they plan like destroying the world. They've corrupted a lot of things. They've also corrupted a lot of nature as well, which can also reflect on our disregard for nature and how badly we treat it as well. So that when we originally got the script, that did draw me in quite a lot. Less so in our project. We were originally going to have some queer characters. We casted a couple of our leads blind, like we didn't necessarily like have a set gender for them. And with recasting and shuffling around the cast that we got, we ended up without a queer storyline that we did originally have, since we had to change around some actors. But the storyline itself is still quite queer because it was written that way. It just hasn't ended up that way with our actors themselves. So some of the obstacles that we encountered were due to a lot of our locations. Since we were filming almost entirely externally, we were filming in northern Wales and in some woods local to here. One of our major obstacles has been the weather and getting that consistency. So we shot a scene in Wales where it rained, and then we had to shoot the scene afterwards back here in Liverpool, in which it wasn't raining, it was actually quite sunny. So we knew that in post that we could recolour grade it to match the scene in Wales, but then it was the fact of the actors not being wet anymore. So that resulted in us going, okay, what can we bring to mist down the actors? And we had to go out and get some like misting bottles to make sure everything was consistent. along with another difficulty, was getting all of our equipment to Wales, in which we had to get a train down there. And then once we were there, very thankfully, one of the director's parents who lived nearby managed to give us a lift to our final shooting location. But that was a difficult journey. It was planning it prior, making sure everyone who was coming directly from Liverpool was there on time, that we had all our kit, all the equipment, double checking everything before we got on the train, getting off the train, making sure we hadn't left anything before the train left the platform as well. Yes, from this I've learned that if I'm going to be, say, like doing location shooting from far away, it would most likely be easier to hire out a van and getting someone who can drive onto the team so that like movement between locations is a lot easier. As for like the weather issues, I think for that it's mostly a matter of we can't control the weather as filmmakers, but making the best of the situations that we had and the times we had to film. So I think us getting the misting bottles to make sure the actors still matched the previous scene was like our best solution for that outcome. So projects I've done in the past 3 years, I'd say probably the first project that I did when I came here. So I did a documentary piece about trans people and representation in media, where I interviewed some trans people that I knew and asked them about their experience with seeing representation in media, how it's changed since they were first questioning themselves and now to what they're seeing on TV. I think as a starting off piece, it was very important to me to hear what trans people were wanting to see past a filmmaker's perspective, because I know as a trans person what I want to see in film and TV, but what is it that the people who are strictly just watching this content want to see, and how what they saw on TV affected them when they were younger. So they wanted to see more positive like interactions of trans people on TV. A lot of the time they are the sad case of the sad story. They've not got like a supporting family, and the world's very difficult for them. Whilst that is true for a lot of trans people, there are also people who come from families that are very supportive and they have that good like community around them. But only seeing the negative side, it does make it very difficult for young people who are questioning their identities to then come out, because they think it's just going to be a negative experience the entire time. As for myself, what I want to see more is trans peoples with more depth of character than just their transness, because it does end up being a lot of that being their defining feature. And as with any other like minority identity, it should be their character should be expanded on from that, as for anyone that's not just their defining feature. So an upcoming project I'm excited about, it's just in the post-production phase now, is a lesbian romance story that is called Spells and Serendipity. I'm most excited for that because a lot of lesbian romances, they start off with one of them being like, no, I'm straight, I've got a boyfriend, and cheating on the boyfriend with a woman, and it paints them in such a negative light. And I personally don't like that. I talk to people who are part of the lesbian community and they don't like it either. It's a massive misrepresentation. So I've worked with a writer to write a story in which that doesn't happen, and it's a fairly like organic movement into a relationship from being two people who live in the same flat building to becoming friends, and then that moving into a relationship by the end of it. And I'm very excited for the final product. It's also one that I do plan on submitting to some film festivals later on in the year, since it is a Christmas-based film as well. I'm not sure if I would have done much differently in my studies, at least not from a project perspective. I'm very happy with the things I've created since starting this degree, considering beforehand I didn't have much film experience that was more professional. I may have changed some of the options of modules that I picked. As some of them, I'm looking back on them and going, that maybe wasn't the correct fit for me at the time, and now reflecting on what it is I want to do more in the future of. But other than that, I've been like fairly happy with what I've made these past 3 years and how I've studied.